It's the trickle-down attendance model.
Trickle in attendance. Welcome to those just tuning in. We're going to give folks a few minutes to get their computers situated, get everything working, and then we'll start in just a minute. All right, I think we've got critical mass. Well, welcome everyone to the Making Heat Pumps Accessible and Affordable to Decarbonize Buildings webinar. My name is Ethan Elkind. I direct the climate program at UC Berkeley Law School Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment, which is a research center at the law school dedicated to developing law and policy solutions to address all sorts of environmental and energy challenges, including that of how we decarbonize buildings. So very pleased that you can join us for this webinar, which is in many ways to mark the release of our report, which we just released last week, called Hot, Cold, and Clean: Policy Solutions to Promote Equitable and Affordable Adoption of Heat Pump Retrofits in Existing Buildings. There may be some of you who are not familiar with heat pumps, but they are in fact an all-electric way to heat, which is very timely for those of us here in the Northern Hemisphere, particularly for anyone either in Europe right now or thinking of folks in Europe dealing with an extreme heat event there. That only makes, I think, this heat pump conversation even more relevant. So for this webinar, we're gonna, after following these brief welcoming remarks, we're gonna go through the report findings, and then we're gonna have a moderated panel, and we're very pleased to be joined by three distinguished speakers: Commissioner Andrew McAllister from the California Energy Commission, Chelsea Kirk from Strategic Actions for a Just Economy, and Panama Bartholomew from the Building Decarbonization Coalition. So you'll hear from them in just a moment. But before we get to all of that, I want to first pass it over to our partner and our co-sponsor and co-host of this webinar, which is part of a longstanding initiative called the Climate Change and Business Research Initiative that's been sponsored by Bank of America. This is a partnership between UC Berkeley Law School's Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment and UCLA Law's Emmett Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. So I want to pass it over to my friend, mentor, and colleague, Sean Hecht, who's the co-executive director of the Emmett Institute, for some welcoming remarks. So Sean, over to you.
Thank you, Ethan, and thanks to everybody who worked to put this together. I just wanted to highlight how crucial building decarbonization is in the portfolio of things that we are going to have to do in order to decarbonize our economy, and especially how important it is to center equity in the building decarbonization process. And one of the things I really appreciate about the turn that this series of reports and convenings has taken is an increasing focus on equity in climate solutions. And this particular report is a really great demonstration of how we can work to center equity as we work to decarbonize our economy. It's going to be really crucial both for the policy itself in order to ensure that we have an equitable transition to a clean energy economy, and not incidentally also to ensure that there's broad-based support for these types of policies. It's going to really be central to focus on these questions, and I really appreciate the work that the authors of this report and the participants in this convening did in order to develop these strategies. I'm really looking forward to hearing what everybody says today. I want to echo the thanks to Bank of America for sponsoring this this entire program and including this report, and to thank Ethan and his team for leading this this initiative. So I'm going to throw it back to Ethan, and you can get us started. But it's great to see everybody here today, and looking forward to hearing from everyone this afternoon.
Great, thank you, Sean. And Bank of America has been a longstanding supporter of this work. You can see all the reports in our series at our website, climatepolicysolutions.org. We're very pleased to get that URL, but Rich Brown, Senior Vice President for the Environment at Bank of America, could not be here today, but sends his thanks and welcome to all of you for joining. So let's get right into it. I want to introduce our research fellow in our climate program, Ross Zellen, who really took the lead in authoring the report that is really the occasion for this webinar, although it's always a good occasion to talk about heat pumps. So I'm going to let Ross walk through some of the key findings from the report, and then we'll get to our panel and Q&A as well. So Ross.
Thank you so much, Ethan, and thank you all for attending. I'm Ross Zellen, and I am a fairly new research fellow at CLE, and I really want to thank thank the entire group that's here, and then thank all the convening participants. We had about 20 utility, environmental, nonprofit experts who came together and came together earlier this year and did a whole half day to discuss how we can deploy millions of heat pumps in California over the next decade to achieve our ambitious climate and necessary climate targets that we have, as evidenced by the climate disruption that we're seeing this week. I just wanted to take a moment to set the stage for our speakers and talk about what has already happened in California, already existing efforts. We have a number of bills and policies that have already been put in place. Starting in 2015 with Senator Kevin De Leon, SB 350 established very ambitious targets on renewable energy, on doubling energy efficiency, on electric vehicles. Often overlooked is the energy efficiency piece, but this really was a shot in the arm to starting this conversation. And then back in 2018, Assembly Member Laura Friedman passed Assembly Bill 3232, which Commissioner McAllister from the Energy Commission will be able to speak a little bit more in depth about. But really, the Energy Commission did an assessment as part of that bill, as that what they were charged with, and that bill and the assessment laid out the conversation essentially that we're having today about that heat pumps are necessary, and heat pumps are a really important aspect of achieving building decarbonization goals. Next, we had Senator Henry Stern in 2018 passed Senate Bill 1477, which established two programs, and this is where money starts flying in the door here. And this is the build and the tech programs. We're going to hear a little bit more from Panama Bartholomew from the Building Decarbonization Coalition about how these programs, which is really about transforming the marketplace and getting in front of consumers and helping consumers make this switch. The tech program, for example, is really designed to be kind of an initial investment that kind of can be leveraged by utilities and by other players in the building decarbonization space. And just for a rough understanding, about half of the money goes to Southern California, so SoCalGas, the utility, the area served by SoCalGas, which is all the way up to the central part of the state, and then PG&E. Homes and buildings in the PG&E territory get about 40% of the funds from the tech program. And then, very notably, last year, the Energy Commission, adopted the 2022 Building Energy Efficiency Code, which said, which is a big deal. It's the first in the nation, first in the world to include electric heat pumps as a baseline technology. And that's going to go into effect on January 1st, 2023, which gives builders, contractors, and other parties a year to get ready for the changes. But that building energy efficiency code is important, but it's actually not what we're really getting after in this report, which is the existing buildings and how do we ensure that the existing buildings are done equitably. And so our group came together earlier this year, and first we laid out a vision for how do we deploy millions of heat pumps in an equitable and effective manner. And so we really wanted to make sure that that all buildings if we're deploying buildings and homes, we're deploying buildings where people are currently living and they're going to continue to live. And, and California being a very expensive rent burden state with a high proportion of renters, we need to make sure that we don't have any unintended consequences of raising rents or raising cost on folks who can least afford it. And so we wanted to make sure that we not only dealt with the tenant issue, and Chelsea will speak to that more in depth, but we also dealt with the physical infrastructure that we're going to need to potentially upgrade. We're going to need to potentially upgrade electrical panels, distribution lines at the neighborhood scale, and make sure that is ready for a major uptick in heat pump deployment, because that will kind of create a new source of strain on the electrical grid. And both Commissioner McAllister and Panama can talk about what utilities are doing to prepare for that as well. And then we also talked about, what are some of the priority communities, just because there's so much happening in the state of California. We're, unfortunately burdened by having to rebuild from wildfire. Certain communities in Northern California and Southern California are experiencing kind of the rebuilding process after dealing with wildfire damage and destruction, maybe focusing on those types of communities to make them all electric, focusing on neighborhood scales where they're already suffering from the worst pollution, health impacts, and air impacts. So really focusing on getting the best bang for the buck in deploying heat pumps most effectively. And then the report really kind of came up with 4 main barriers or 4 themes. And these themes really focused on the fact that, there's kind of the state role of kind of creating consistent, organized state policy. And, and I will say to the state of California's credit, they are doing just a tremendous amount on this effort, and they are very organized. And Commissioner McAllister will talk about how agencies are working together, everyone from the California Energy Commission to the California Workforce Development Board, working with the California Air Resources Board, which is undertaking its scoping plan update process right now. So there is a lot of unity, but there is also a need to really focus and get a consistent, unified message so that we can kind of scale heat pump market transformation to the extent that we need. And then also one of the other things that we'll talk about a little bit is the workforce knowledge and the barriers to making sure that we have a trained workforce, a supported workforce, and a supported and supported consumer base. So the report really focused on how do we deploy existing funds most effectively? How do we set clear signals to homeowners, to affordable housing building owners and operators about when we are going to phase out gas, space, and water heaters? And these signals will be the most important thing we can do so that people can get ready. And there's a lot of alignment that can happen with regional air boards down here in Southern California in the South Coast Air Quality Management District. There is already rules and kind of a timeline being put in, and the Bay Area Air Quality Management District is doing similarly, kind of setting timelines on when the last gas furnace will be sold in that basin or in that air district, and we can potentially do that statewide and move forward. And then also really working with affordable housing providers to improve that electrical infrastructure, to improve the paneling, to get ready for other electric appliances that are going to be plugged in, such as electric vehicles and those types of things, making sure that we're kind of electric ready. And really that was the kind of key portions of the report. So at that point, I'm gonna turn it over back to Ethan, and he can introduce our panelists, and we can hear from them on their takeaways from the report and what the next steps are.
All right, great. Thank you, Ross. And I also want to just shout out our co-authors on the report, Ted Lamb and Katie Siegel. Both, well, Ted's a senior research fellow. Katie's a research fellow in our Climate and Oceans program, and Ted's with the climate program. But with that, let's launch into the panel. I'm going to introduce them one by one to keep all of you on your toes. So let's start with our first speaker. He's, I think, beyond returning champion at this point. He's sort of like the Tom Hanks hosting SNL version of our webinar series here, because we've been very fortunate to have Commissioner Andrew McAllister present a number of these webinars. Problem is, Commissioner McAllister, you're just working on too many important and interesting topics, so we have to cover all of them, or at least as many as we can. But Commissioner McAllister is serving his second term on the California Energy Commission. He leads the policy area of energy efficiency, which includes building energy efficiency standards, very relevant to the discussion today, of course, as well as appliance efficiency and load management and flexibility. And I have to note, he also is a UC Berkeley alum, having received his Master's of Science and PhD from our Energy and Resources group. So Commissioner McAllister, over to you for the latest on heat pumps and California policy.
Well, thanks a lot, Ethan. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be returning, and I guess maybe emblematic of the fact that I'm a little long in the tooth at this is the number of these I've done, but also I'm actually in my third term at the Energy Commission. So just starting that, and gratified to be able to keep working on these issues, and you know, for the Governor Newsom's support. So you know, I think it's emblematic of just how important these things are, and continuity. Some continuity ensures continuous progress, right? And it takes a long time to do some of these things. You know, I think I don't want to repeat, I won't repeat what Ross said, but you know, all those points are key critical points. And those are lots of different trains running down parallel tracks that all need to be talking to each other. And to get to the building standards where they are for 2022 and, you know, looking to 2025, I mean, that took many cycles of updating the building standards to be able to create that platform on which we could really put the pedal down on heat pumps and just really create those opportunities to use the building standards, not only to provide value to customers, but also to drive markets. And so that's what California is good at, is ensuring that our big market is used for good and brings customer value. So I think heat pumps are increasingly a key part of this overall story, and I'll talk about a few aspects of that just briefly. I mean, that was a great job, Ross, summarizing the report, and I just think the convening was very collegial and insightful, with lots of great participation from a diversity of folks, and just kudos to Clee and the team for orchestrating and managing that. It's just, it creates a good product, and it provides the clarity that we all need to get consensus and move forward. So, yeah, Sean, thanks a lot. And Ross again, Chelsea in Panama for your participation today, and you know, Kiki behind the scenes, putting it all together. So the path is heat pumps. I mean, that is our path. Ross mentioned the 3232 report from Laura Friedman, and I think I won't show any graphics because they're pretty involved. I very much encourage you all to look at that report, but it is very clear that an aggressive electrification of our existing building stock is the only way we meet 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. It's and even then it's a challenge. You know, it really requires active retirement, early retirement of existing units. But the new construction piece of that's a small piece. It's important because it drives markets, but it's a small piece of the overall solution. Existing buildings really are where the action needs to be and where we need to make a lot of progress. So I think we're all in agreement on that. You know, heat pumps work. The technology is here. It's wonderful. It in many ways is a better product. It is also, I think, modern and can be, not all heat pumps are more efficient than gas or resistant to electric, but increasingly heat pumps are getting more and more efficient. Their operation is getting optimized so that they actually harvest that efficiency in reality. And they also can support digital controls and communications that enable them to play nice on the grid. And I think all of those factors ensure that they will be central to California energy policy going forward. Part of the reason that I'm always in these discussions is, you know, many times these are demand side issues. These are energy efficiency and buildings and demand side, you know, more distributed energy resources. And all of these activities that I'm going to just mention briefly are in that realm. The distribution grid increasingly is the thing. I think we have a lot of action up at the west-wide grid, the transmission system, and we need to sort of integrate there in ways that make sense to take advantage of the west-wide geography across the Western Interconnect. The other end of that spectrum there of the grid is the individual appliances that are using that electricity. And from top to bottom, everything needs to coordinate. Communications and controls at the demand side are a key aggregatable resource that does three things. Everybody knows about decarbonization on this call, in this report. That is in the near term, flexible electric loads help decarbonization. 3230 report makes that very clear. Over time, as the grid itself gets cleaner and cleaner, we get to an end stage where it's already 100% non-fossil, it's 100% clean energy. But even then, these resources will play a role in keeping costs down, a key role in keeping costs down, downward pressure on rates by optimizing the use of the distribution grid, and also enhancing reliability by having load flexibility that's aggregatable and being targeted and dispatchable like a resource, whether it's in response to rates or some event on the grid, congestion pricing, a heat wave, whatever it is. These devices are going to be playing very nice in the grid sandbox. And so all of these reasons are why heat pumps are so critical. Ross mentioned some of the programs, tech and build. I would mention, we are building out this ecosystem of load flexibility in the state at kind of breakneck speed at this point. We've been working on this for 5 or 6 years, and it's really starting to bear fruit. Earlier today, we had the first workshop for a device that will have native load flexibility under Nancy Skinner's bill, SB 49, for flexible demand appliance standards. Well, flexible demand standards are coming soon to a heat pump near you. It'll be our next device category that we're going to incorporate flexibility, native flexibility. And in a few years, it won't be possible to sell a heat pump, water heater, or HVAC system that does not have native load flexibility, that can respond automatically to rate signals and other signals like carbon content, like grid congestion, et cetera. So from the CAISO to the device, we're talking about really having a very well-connected integrated management system. And heat pumps, again, are central to that happening. We also have some R&D, the CalFlex Hub, which is helping develop business models and approaches that are going to help make this possible. And so there's just so much optimism. There's so much reason to be optimistic about how California can lead in this realm and provide incredible value. And I'll just wrap up by mentioning a couple things. I'm not going to talk about equity, not because I don't think it's important. It is central to this conversation. We will not meet our goals. Okay, it's not just because it's the right thing to do, which it is to help everyone have access to this technology, but it's also just absolutely necessary for California to meet its climate goals. Everyone has to be able to participate. Chelsea's going to talk about that, and others, I'm sure. So the Energy Commission is really revolving all of our discussions around equity, first, and really leaning on the Disadvantaged Community Advisory Board that we put together with the PUC. So again, existing buildings are so important. The new construction market is facing a lot of headwinds. This economy is not helping new construction, and existing buildings are, again, just where we have to go. And then finally, I just agree, Ross, we are absolutely collaborating across many agencies these days. I'd say more than ever before, certainly in my time at the commission, and not just the energy agencies like the Energy Commission, PUC, and Air Resources Board, but again, the CAISO, as I mentioned, housing agencies that play a strong role in both new and existing housing, the state license board on the enforcement regime, making sure that quality is there and that there's accountability in the supply chain. The AQMDs, the air quality management districts, local governments are also a key partner here. So I think there really is a very multifaceted effort to help transform the heat pump market within this broader decarbonization effort. And so many good people, good entities, good institutions are bringing their A game to the table. And so the customer value proposition is a challenge. I'm sure we'll talk about that. Electricity is relatively pricey in much of the state. And so we really have to put our thinking caps on and come up with approaches, new rates, combining with energy efficiency, all of these things to help our buildings be all they can be to the benefit of the customer, the resident and the owner of those buildings. So anyway, I'll wrap up there. I know it's a lot, but this report really does help us sharpen our pencils and sharpen our policies going forward. Really appreciate the platform to discuss and the content of the report and all your efforts, Ethan and team. Really appreciate CLE.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Commissioner McAllister. It's exciting to see the full weight of the 5th largest economy in the world really starting to focus on heat pumps. And we've obviously seen success in other contexts with renewable energy, electric vehicles. And if we can do the same thing with heat pumps, we can really make a major difference for all those benefits that we've been discussing: indoor air quality and climate change and even human public health safety at this point, given extreme heat. So I really appreciate those remarks. And as my colleague Ross put in the chat, if you have questions for any of our speakers, please do use the Q&A function. We'll have a little bit of time at the end to go through those. But since Commissioner McAllister mentioned equity, that's a perfect segue to our next speaker, Chelsea Kirk, who is a research and policy analyst at Strategic Actions for a Just Economy. That's a nonprofit that builds community leadership and power for economic justice by fighting for tenants' rights, healthy housing, and equitable development. Chelsea researches and does policy advocacy to improve housing quality for tenants in Los Angeles specifically. The organization authored the report, Los Angeles Building Decarbonization, Tenant Impact and Recommendations, which analyzes the impact that greenhouse gas reduction policies may have on renters in Los Angeles. So I'm sure Chelsea will can talk a little bit more about that report. Otherwise, Chelsea, interested to hear your take on how we can ensure that we achieve equitable outcomes and equitable access to heat pumps as we move forward on this deployment in California and other jurisdictions as well.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ethan. Yeah, I just want to start by saying it was really great to be able to participate in this report and to really see the outcome of it and how it really centers equity, specifically the issue of housing affordability and renter stability, which I'll be talking about today. So I'm just going to briefly talk about 4 key challenges to decarbonization broadly for low-income renters. These are challenges that were also brought up throughout this report, and why it's really important that policy is designed wisely to sort of address these challenges and avoid unintended consequences. That's going to be critically important if we're serious about equitable decarbonization. So I do have some slides to share, but I promise my speaking will be brief. And let me know if you have trouble seeing it. 1 second. Great. So what are the key 4 challenges? They are cost, accessibility, habitability issues, dealing with building characteristics, and landlord-tenant dynamics. Right, so we know that decarbonization can be expensive, even heat pump technology, when we consider the cost for these new appliances, energy efficiency improvements, even gas disconnection, panel upgrades, the cost of building permits and labor to carry out this retrofit work. And in many cities, including some of California's largest cities like LA, San Jose, and San Francisco, property owners can actually pass on between 70% to 100% of the cost of these upgrades onto rent-controlled tenants. And given the current market conditions of our housing market and our current housing crisis, and a lot of tenants in California are low income, they're just not able to absorb these costs. Many of them already face high rent burdens and low wages, and many also have rental debt due to COVID-19 job loss. And so this is going to be a big barrier to adopting heat pump technology and also other decarbonization measures. And this high cost is also going to prevent low-income tenants from pursuing energy efficiency measures on their own without a great levels of funding and technical assistance. The second challenge is accessibility. What we've learned at SAGE from participating in city and state programs meant to reach low-income folks is that they often fail to do so. And there are 3 main reasons why that we've identified. The first is poor outreach. So a lot of program outreach involving like English-only materials or online distribution, which we see very frequently, will not reach low-income and immigrant communities who can benefit from the most from these programs and these new technologies. Digital literacy is also another one. Enrollment in programs usually requires applicants to have internet, computers, smartphones, email addresses, just to apply for a program. But many low-income, elderly, and immigrant tenants and customers do not have access to this technology. And so this makes it extremely difficult for them to take advantage of programs that might allow them or incentivize them to get new heat pump technology. Lease agreements is also another barrier. A common provision in a California tenant's lease is that they're actually prohibited from altering the apartment, such as by removing anything that was in there when they moved in. So a lot of tenants will actually forego maybe taking advantage of a program that will give them a free appliance if this lease provision exists. Through our work at Sage, we actually do contract work for program enrollment with LA's Department of Water and Power for their refrigerator exchange program. This is a program where the city will actually directly install a new energy efficient fridge for low-income customers. And we found that about 50% of folks that we've actually tried to help enroll in this program choose not to do so because they don't want to risk violating their lease. So we need to think about workarounds for that. Habitability is another issue. At Sage, many of the tenants we support live in very old buildings with deferred maintenance and severe habitability issues. So I just want to share some photos. This is actually pictures of one of our members' homes. This tenant lives with holes in her walls, broken windows, a non-working water heater. She actually hasn't had hot water in years. And so her landlord won't repair these issues, despite even pressure from county agencies. And so tenants living in these types of conditions, which we actually see very commonly in South Los Angeles, where Sage is located, among low-income households, they will not see electrification as a priority. Homes like these will not be electrified before these other more serious habitability issues are taken care of. And a sort of final important challenge to note is landlord-tenant dynamics. A lot of tenants that we support in Los Angeles through our tenant action clinic at Sage live under the constant threat of harassment and displacement risks from unscrupulous landlords who are actually looking to profit off rising market values. A lot of landlords we come across in our work, not all, but many of them view low-income tenants like the ones we help as obstacles sort of standing in the way of greater profits. And so we really need to think about how do we ensure that landlords who decarbonize their buildings do not then attempt to replace those low-income tenants that live in them with higher paying tenants to recover costs or to capitalize on the new value add of decarbonization measures or new technologies that have been installed. And so this is a challenge. And so I just wanted to share some recommendations, many of which were included in this great report that we're convening today for. And one really important one that I always bring up is partnering with community-based organizations to do outreach and enrollment for programs. This really helps with improving accessibility and providing also support to tenants throughout the process. Community-based organizations, they're strategically positioned to be effective at this because they're already serving underrepresented communities and usually in low income areas. So they can really use their existing relationships to access people that are hard to reach. Additionally, they can actually also be effective at helping achieve landlord consensus around certain program stipulations, dealing with that sort of lease provision issue. And they can also sort of act as an enforcer of existing tenant protections because of their knowledge and connection to resources. Another is to target funding and programs to low-income customers in disadvantaged communities, especially where funding is limited. Third is recognizing the threats that tenants face and making robust tenant protections a design element of any programs or efforts to decarbonize. Engaging local housing agencies is another one that's really important. This will ensure effective enforcement of tenant protections since local housing agencies are they administer and enforce tenant protections. Taking holistic approaches to retrofit work also, and including sufficient funding and programs to remediate habitability issues that might be unrelated to decarbonization retrofit work. And then lastly, actively managing the execution of decarbonization work to prioritize skilled professional work, high quality results, and low impact to tenants. And so that's it for me, but I really appreciate that this report really does bring up many of these recommendations, has really comprehensive solutions to a lot of these problems around housing affordability and renter stability. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chelsea, just for highlighting, just some of the need, I think, in very stark terms there with some of the visuals you provided, and also the potential risks here if we don't do this right, given that heat pumps, do add those upfront costs to install, and it can add to rent burdens. And so it's really important that we have tailored, effective policies, not just at the state level, but at the local level as well. So thank you, Chelsea, for raising these important points and for the work that you're doing at Sage. And now, last but not least, I want to introduce our third and final speaker, Panama Bartholomew, who's the Executive Director of the Building Decarbonization Coalition. He is standing in for Jose Torres, who unfortunately couldn't make it today, but we're very pleased, Panama, that you can join us. Previous to the work on the Building Decarbonization Coalition, Panama worked as European Director for the Investor Confidence Project with Environmental Defense Fund, and he's also worked for multiple California state agencies, including the California Legislature, the Energy Commission, State Architect, and California Conservation Corps. So Panama, thank you for joining us, and interested to hear some of the initiatives that you think are most promising in terms of heat pump deployment in California.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Ethan and Ross and Clee. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a real honor to be on the panel with the commissioner and Chelsea. California right now is really leading the conversation on heat pumps, and Commissioner McAllister is a primary reason for that in his leadership about pushing forward the building code we just saw, and pushing for funding and programs, and recognizing the holistic role that heat pumps have to play in our energy transition, as his remarks suggested, are a key role about why we're playing this leadership role. And Chelsea's work at Sage has been incredibly important to raise the conversation about needing to protect tenants. We're a 40% renter state. And the reality is that renters generally don't have much agency over the appliances that are in their houses and in their apartments. And so we don't want to have inequitable electrification where people with agency over appliance choice decide to hop off the gas grid, and it's the people that don't have agency or can't afford it are left on the gas grid paying increasingly higher gas tariffs. So it's an honor to be on the panel with both champions of building electrification and doing it the right way. The coalition that I work at is a coalition of utilities, manufacturers of heating equipment, the design and construction community, government agencies, and nonprofit. And we all work together to try to eliminate pollution from buildings through electrification. We work both on policy as well as on market solutions to achieve this. And heat pumps are, what we talk about first thing in the morning, we talk about all day, and what we talk about right before we go to bed, say our little prayer to the heat pump. And so it was really encouraging to take part in the sessions that led to this report, and even more encouraging to see the final result of the report. It has some very important recommendations. I think it had a very nice coverage of the issues facing heat pumps and what California communities, consumers, contractors, et cetera, all need to do to move heat pumps forward. So congratulations on the release of the report, and everybody on this panel should definitely, everybody at this webinar should definitely read this report and print off 5 copies and give them to family members who I'm sure will enjoy it as well. I was asked to come and talk about some of the initiatives, some of the early initiatives we're seeing here in what I would call the first wave of modern electrification. And, this is probably the overall third wave of electrification. The first being a real movement in the early 20th century for rural electrification. The second in the 70s, a really big push for electrification. And now we're doing it largely for climate change and air quality reasons, but also increasingly a recognition that natural gas is part of a global market that we have very little control over here in California. We import about 80 to 90% of the gas we use. And so we are at the at the mercy of international gas markets, whereas our electricity, we control most of our electricity supplies, and we're able to better regulate that and hopefully provide a more of an assurance to building owners and occupants about the supply of it and the cost of it. And so we're at the very first stage of this modern wave of electrification. And I say that because when you look at heat pumps, we have about less than 10% market share for heat pumps in California for space heating, and less than 2% share for water heating for heat pumps. And so we're starting from a very low adoption rate. And yet we see agencies, as Ross mentioned, like the two largest air quality management districts in California, and the California Air Resources Board, proposing to phase out gas water heaters and gas furnaces by the end of this decade. And so if we're going from a market share of 10% for space conditioning and 2% for water heating, and over 8 years, we're going to be seeking to outlaw these, you can imagine that we're going to have to invest in some significant programs and policies in between now and then to get up to a market share, as well as just an overall market that could support those sorts of mandates. And so the report laid out a series of recommendations of exactly those types of initiatives. And I'm just going to briefly talk about two, and with my remaining time, and then hand it back to the moderators for some questions and answers. So the first one is really the state's first approach at trying to support heat pump deployment. And it's a program that's been referred to by both Ross and Commissioner McAllister, which is the TEC program. And this is a program that was supported by state legislation, and it uses some of our cap and trade funds to directly support the implementation of heat pumps for space conditioning and water heating in homes, existing homes across California. It provides a rebate to lower the cost of these technologies, and it's what's called a midstream rebate. And so when you think about rebate programs, there's basically three choices: a downstream rebate, a midstream rebate, and an upstream rebate. A downstream rebate is like a mail-in rebate that you get the appliance installed, and you as a homeowner or your contractor fills out a little form, you send it in, you get some money back, but you're paying the full cost of that appliance up front. A midstream rebate, the rebate goes directly to the contractor or the distributor or the retail establishment. So you're able to see the actual lowering of the cost of the appliance at the sale point, either to the customer or to the contractor. An upstream rebate is money going directly to manufacturers to be able to lower those costs. And so across the country, there's been decades and decades of research about the types of energy efficiency programs that work and don't work. And what we found by and large is that midstream rebates, we believe, are the best approach for something like water heaters and furnaces, because generally these are replaced in an emergency situation. And people are making decisions under a dire situation of wanting to get their hot water back, and a midstream rebate where the rebate can be applied at the point of sale, we've found can have the best impact on transitioning people from gas to electricity. So the TEC program is a nearly statewide incentive program. It's in the investor-owned utility areas, and it provides these rebates directly to contractors to help lower the cost and encourage contractors to be able to sell these technologies to building owners and to homeowners. It's was supposed to be a 4-year program. But the demand is very high in California for these technologies, and it seems like the contractors sell very well. And so not 6 months after the unveiling of the program, the 4-year budget has run out of this program. It's a very innovative program that includes not just incentives, but also financing, consumer education, workforce development. It's really a holistic program approach to be able to deploy heat pumps. And the incentive program has been depleted. And so they've stopped now accepting applications for this program due to its success. And there's hope within the community that some of the budget surplus that California is experiencing right now will be able to refill some of the coffers of what is really the most successful heat pump program in the country right now. And so unfortunately, you can't get a tech rebate right now, but there's tons of lessons learned coming from it. And hopefully, fingers crossed, in August, there will be a deal brokered and some money will be able to come back into this program. The last thing I'll say about tech, and perhaps one of the most interesting things for folks like Commissioner McAllister and myself, is that part of this program is to set up a public database of every appliance that is installed under this program. And that public database is going to have information like how much did that installation cost? What type of technology was installed? And then how is it performing? And so we're finally going to be able to have a comprehensive database of heat pump numbers and be able to use that in policymaking as well as consumer and tenant protections. So we'll be able to tell people, that bid is far out of range for what it should be, or this should be performing at a much different level than what you have right now. And so this public database is going to become available this summer and is going to be a fantastic tool for policymakers and for those of us trying to push this technology. So that's the tech program. Just if you want to find out more information, Google Tech California, and you'll be able to find information. And the last thing I'll just talk about is a initiative that was called for in the report that we're discussing today, which is a consumer education initiative. And we at the Building Decarbonization Coalition have teamed up with utilities and community choice aggregators, manufacturers, retail establishments, to put together a program called The Switch Is On. And this is a broad-based consumer education campaign to help people just get the basic idea that electrification is better than gas, and then to give them tools about how to find both contractors and incentives to be able to help them down this path of electrification. The reality is, because heat pumps are generally installed under emergency situations, education is hard in that moment, and the best educator is going to be the contractor having that conversation with the customer. And so what we need to do as we think about policy and education is really making sure that electrification provides a good value proposition for the installer, so they want to sell heat pumps to the consumer, and then just enough of an air cover type of a consumer education campaign so that you reduce just at least a little bit of the barrier with the customer. The customer can say, oh yeah, I thought I saw a billboard on that, or I heard something on the radio that electrification is better. Okay, I'm willing to go down this path as I'm desperate to get my hot water back. And so the only thing that I will show you now, just sharing my screen briefly, is the incentive finder that we have on the Switches On website. And so if you go to switcheson.org and click on incentives, you'll come here. I've typed in Ethan's zip code right here in the incentive finder. And Ethan is looking for a new space heating and cooling solution. And you hit search. And in that area, you can see there's 8 different incentives. All 8 incentives that are available to Ethan for his area for heat pumps are right here, whether it's from the Energy Smart Homes program, the PG&E program, or the BayREN program. And it talks about which one of those you're able to layer on top of each other. So it's the first time you ever have one resource that talks about how you can actually layer rebates on top. A lot more information on that. And then wonderfully, we also have a contractor. We have a contractor search tool where we have over 1,000 contractors that we pre-screened that know how to do electrification. They won't talk you out of electrification, know how to do it. And we have them up here on the website. You can search by your zip code again, but everybody within a 50-mile radius who's going to help you down the path of electrification. We found that the 3 things consumers need are basic information about what is electrification, where can I get money to help, and then where's a contractor that can help me down this journey. And so with the Switches On campaign, it's the first generation of an educational campaign that can really help people down this path. So I'm going to stop my remarks there to save some time for question and answers. Thank you so much for having the coalition here, and really honored to be on this robust panel.
Thank you, Panama, and thank you for investigating my my options there. I'm assuming you were referring to me as for heat pumps. I am in the market for heat pumps, so this is very timely. Well, Commissioner McAllister, let me go to you. We've some great questions here in the Q&A, and we have a question. Someone asked, what about the logistical and timing issues associated with accomplishing both our heat pump deployment goals and our EV goals? Is a supply chain there, and are the utilities in a position to marshal the resources to really meet this pretty dramatic scale up in electricity demand that we would see in the state if we really meet and we hope to meet our zero emission vehicle goals and our building decarbonization goals?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and this is not the only challenge, right? We're also trying to scale up EVs, arguably more aggressively with a bigger near-term impact on the grid than even the heat pump switch. And so, yeah, the distribution grid, as I said, is kind of the thing that actually, the increased demand goes all the way back up to the bulk power system, but managing the distribution grid becomes a challenge. The utilities, and the investor-owned utilities in their way, regulated by the PUC, and then also the publicly owned utilities with their own governing bodies, they do absolutely have the mechanisms to identify those upcoming costs and get them authorized, and yes, get them into the rate base. That's why it's so, so two things. One, when you double the throughput of an existing distribution grid, that absolutely can provide downward pressure on rates on like a per unit basis. And so that's a key point. And that's something we have to accomplish. And number two, it's why I always emphasize load flexibility and active management of all these loads, both on the EV side, when you charge really matters, that peak load on the distribution grid, same with the heat pump, same with all of your electric devices in your home. Now, not every load is sort of flexible like that, but that's why we need the smarts in the system to be able to manage these loads. And I neglected to mention in my comments that the Energy Commission last year, in adopting the Integrated Energy Policy Report, suggested a 6 million heat pump goal by 2030. And we're under 1 million right now. As Panama said, the traction is gaining in the marketplace, but still, it's a long way to go. And on the natural, with the building code and all these programs, we think we might get halfway there, 2.5, 2.7 by 2030. And so we really do need to redouble our efforts to juice the heat pump market. The building code will do some of that, and hopefully there'll be some spillover effects to the rest of the market there. But all of these challenges are real for sure. But I do think that our regulatory mechanisms and our rate making mechanisms are up to that challenge.
And Commissioner McAllister, just staying with you, Panama mentioned the budget. What do you see as kind of the big things that we should be looking for in the budget, or if people wanted to get involved in ensuring big things happen with the budget?
Well, yeah, so I have learned not to handicap what might happen in the budget. But there is, we are very blessed in California to have this large surplus. The governor is very committed to putting as much as he can into a climate package. Reliability with the heat, the searing heat, and just preparing for these massive summer heat waves is job one. It's the highest priority. There's just no doubt about that. But the transportation infrastructure and the buildings infrastructure are also very much on the table, and industry and transitioning to hydrogen, dealing with the gas grid, all of that is part of the package. But the discussion has been in the many hundreds of millions of dollars for building decarbonization. And I think the voices that the legislature hears really matter at this juncture. Right now they're on recess, but they come back in August, and staff and members are actively thinking about this. And I think Panama can probably sympathize with this, many on the phone probably, but when you spend your career in energy efficiency, you sort of sometimes feel like the backup choice for a date. Because there's a sexier technology out there just ahead. And so energy efficiency is fundamental to California energy policy. It was, is, and always will be. Managing energy better and more efficiently is just the #1 resource. And so keeping that point, active and alive will help us take advantage of this moment to both put in new technologies equitably and deal with these multiple goals of decarbonization, reliability, and equity.
Great. Well, thank you, and we'll see what happens with the budget going forward. Chelsea, I wanted to direct a question to you. One of our attendees here asks about recommendations for how local governments can best expedite decarbonizing existing buildings, and if you have any specific recommendations on this point. I know you're very focused on tenant protection, so how can we achieve both of those goals of expediting heat pump deployment, but also protecting tenants? And given your experience in LA, what can other local governments learn?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think a lot of cities right now, not just in California, but across the country, are considering local ordinances to decarbonize the building stock. Usually the approach is taking like a building energy performance standard. New York City has one in their local law 97, Washington, DC has one, St. Louis has one. And Los Angeles actually just passed a motion in April to begin designing one. And so that's going to happen. Implementation probably won't happen until next year. And the idea is that that's probably going to be a requirement for buildings of a certain type. Certain property types are going to have to meet certain energy reductions by a certain targeted date. So that is a way for local governments to expedite this process, is to like immediately start designing and implementing building energy performance standards. Now, the word expediting, that kind of scares tenant advocates and other folks in the environmental justice space, because there's a lot of steps that sort of need to happen before we can start implementing policies that make requirements for landlords to come and retrofit homes that tenants live in. And it's because we have a lot of inadequate tenant protections in cities like, and I can only speak for LA, but I'm sure this is true across California. And so in our ordinance specifically, tenants' rights groups like SAGE and other environmental justice groups kind of got in early, and we're talking with policymakers and city council members and the mayor's office about how important it is to write in tenant protections into these policies. And so we actually have in the city motion outlines like equity measures and principles that must be designed and incorporated into the policy. So that's one way to do it. So we're very much a big part of the stakeholder engagement process around that policy and things like that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chelsea. Panama, I wanted to go to you with a question from an attendee that actually is something I am struggling with, despite your efforts to get me a incentives for a heat pump. This person writes in that we're going to have to pay for electric upgrades at the customer panel level to get all these appliances wired in. And this individual got an estimate for a panel upgrade of $5,000 because it adds a significant load, and many of these older existing buildings don't have panels available. So I'm just, I mean, this listener or attendee has specific questions here, but I'm curious how we overcome that part of the problem. You know, it's not just the incentives for the appliance themselves, but getting an electrician in, and if you have to upgrade your panel, that adds a lot of costs. So what are your thoughts on how best we can address that problem?
Yeah, looking at the time, I'll try to get a context in real briefly. So a lot of California has what are going to be undersized electrical panels for what we need for electrification. And when you're adding about 4 new appliances, your water heaters, your space conditioners, your stove, and potentially your dryer, clothes dryer, that can add significant new amperage requirements onto your panel. And so you can either be creative with your panel and try to manage loads on your own, or with a smart panel, which I think we'll increasingly see in the future, which can automatically trade between loads and be able to manage it. Or you're going to have to get a panel upgrade. And before COVID, panel upgrades were going for about $2,500 to $5,000 per upgrade. Since COVID, everything's more expensive, both labor and materials. And so we're seeing even higher numbers across California. And for some reason, San Francisco is just terrible, terribly expensive. So to me, it's going to come down to a choice. And the very first recommendation of the report that we're talking about today was California needs to have a policy that really is in line with the speed at which we're trying to address climate change. And as part of that, if we're going to do this fast, then we're going to have a program to deal with panel upgrades. The tech program provides an incentive for panel upgrades. The new self-generation incentive program, which in first quarter of next year will provide a large rebate for heat pump water heaters, also has money for panel upgrades. That's a piecemeal approach. I think what we're going to have to see, if we're going to be serious about doing this over the next 15 years, is probably a very significant investment, either an investment of public dollars or creative financing that's able to bring in private dollars and be able to have it repaid on your bill over 20 years, so you don't even notice it on your bill to be able to pay it off.
Thanks, Panama. We have just a minute left, and I want to ask each of you for just 30 seconds of concluding thoughts. But I also want to preface it with a question, a real quick question that we got in the chat and that came up a couple times in our convening is, how do we stick with heat pumps as the name? Do we change it? Is it easily understood? Obviously, Panama eats at 3 meals a day. But I want to know from each of our panelists, do we keep heat pumps? Do we think about renaming it? Panama, I'll start with you, and I'll go to Chelsea, and then we'll close with Commissioner McAllister.
Yes, I think we keep it. Generally people don't really care about it. People don't know what a conditioner is, and so I think it's fine. I think we have 20 other more important issues that we need to address in order to get it out. And I just thank you for being on the panel. Thank you for listening to this report. It's critical. It's a critical moment in this conversation. This is a critical report for that conversation. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Panama. Chelsea?
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you. And thank you for having me on this panel. Heat pumps, the name. I mean, most people I talk to and mention heat pumps to tenants, they have no idea what that is, but I'm not sure the name of any technology will really ring as something that resonates. Like, I don't know, unless we can call it a heat and space cooling equipment. Like, so it's just not gonna happen. But yeah, I just wanna say thank you again. Yeah, this report is critically important. And I think like just a quarter of the report is focused on like housing affordability and renter stability. And you don't find that in reports. And so it's a huge, thank you.
Totally agree. I'll just step in. I'm looking at the clock, but I totally agree with both Panama and Chelsea's points there. I have learned not to think that I'm a marketer, so I think we should leave that to the marketers. Again, you learn these through the school of hard knocks, but I embrace my nerddom and I am comfortable in that role. So, but I do think the overall sales kind of messaging really needs to evolve and mature. So, hopefully that'll happen in the marketplace. I wanted to just say thanks. And again, I won't repeat why, but it's just a really critical incursion into this discussion. And I think will help mobilize minds and hearts towards heat pumps. I would point out that there's a national, the Advanced Water Heating Initiative on the water heating heat pump side, which was started and is kind of led by California along with the Department of Energy. So that can really move the national market, and I think will with a little bit of time. And then they're looking at some really critical issues. And then we need manufacturing in the state. If we're going to be this big market that moves markets, we got to have manufacturing in the state. So the OEMs really need to come here and help juice our economy more broadly than just our heat pump population, but actually our workforce. So that's also a big equity issue. So I think the report does a really good job of laying out all these issues, and it's going to serve California in good stead. And again, just really want to thank all the conveners, all the participants, and the team that put this together. Really fabulous job. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank all of you for joining us. We're out of time. We obviously could have had another half an hour or more to talk heat pumps, but we're going to have to leave it right there. But I do want to thank Ross and our co-authors, Katie Siegel, Ted Lamb, Kiki Quach for organizing the convening, of course, Bank of America for their support, and Sean Hecht and everyone at UCLA Emmets Institute for this. So if you do want to see the report and other reports in the series, including on this topic of energy efficiency, building decarbonization, go to our website, climatepolicysolutions.org, or the CLE or Emmett Institute web pages. But thank you all. Hope everyone is pumped to get a heat pump or spread the good news about the heat pump technology, and keep tabs on the policy debate, state and local, going forward. Thanks all. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks, Ross. Cheers.
Decarbonize.
Thank you all.